Welcome back to By the Pages, everybody. Today we are diving into the book of Numbers. And I bet you're probably thinking, Numbers, really? That sounds dry.
Yeah, I can see that.
But trust me, there's more to this book than meets the eye.
It's true.
We got some excerpts here for the Bible Project's Guide to Numbers, plus a couple of other sources.
Yeah.
Just to compare some perspectives.
Sounds good.
So our mission today, if you choose to accept it, is to distill what's essential about this book.
Okay.
From its unique structure to the timeless themes that still resonate with us today. So buckle up, because we're going on a journey through the wilderness,
Okay.
filled with rebellion, a touch of divine intervention, and maybe even some numerical trivia to impress your friends at your next Bible study.
Awesome.
All right, so let's start with the basics. Numbers is the fourth book of the Bible,
Right.
and it picks up the story of the Israelites after their exodus from Egypt.
Right.
God's made this covenant with them at Mount Sinai, and now they're on their way to the Promised Land, right?
Exactly. So one of the first things you'll notice about Numbers is that it's structured around the Israelites' journey through the wilderness after they leave Egypt.
Okay, so it's not just like a random collection of numbers and laws. Like there's an actual narrative unfolding.
Oh, absolutely. The book actually gets its name from the two censuses that are taken of the Israelite people. The first one is right at the beginning of the journey, and then the second one is for the new generation who's about to enter into the Promised Land. It's a journey with three distinct stages: Mount Sinai, then there's the wilderness of Paran, and finally the plains of Moab, right across from their destination.
I see. So we're literally following their footsteps through these locations. It's like an ancient travelogue, but with a much deeper purpose.
Exactly. And woven throughout this journey are some pretty powerful themes, like God's desire for holiness and order, his unwavering faithfulness to his promises, and I think probably most importantly, the preparation of Israel, not just physically, but also spiritually, for entering into the Promised Land.
That's interesting. So it's not just about reaching a destination. It's about the transformation that happens along the way.
Right. It's about becoming the people they're meant to be, ready to inherit the blessings that God has promised.
Okay, I gotta admit, I'm a sucker for a good story.
Sure.
And it seems like Numbers has its fair share of those.
It does.
What are some of the moments that really stand out to you?
Well, one that comes to mind right away is the rebellion of Korah. This guy, a Levite, decides he wants a piece of Moses' authority and claims that everyone in the community is holy, everyone should have access to the priesthood.
Whoa, talk about overstepping some boundaries.
It's a direct challenge to God's established order and the leadership that he had chosen. And just to settle the dispute, God causes the earth to open up and just swallows up Korah and all of his followers.
Whoa, okay, so there are definitely consequences for questioning God's designated leadership.
Oh, there are. It's a pretty stark reminder of who's really in charge here.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, speaking of challenging leadership, what about Moses himself? Didn't he have a bit of a moment at some point?
Ah, yes, you're talking about the incident with the rock. So in Numbers 20, the Israelites are thirsty again, surprise, surprise, and God tells Moses to speak to the rock to bring forth water.
Right.
But, Moses is just fed up. He's had it with their constant complaining.
It does seem like they complain a lot.
Yeah.
Like, is there a deeper message there? Like, is this a no murmuring zone we should be paying attention to?
That's a great point. I think there's definitely a message there about the danger of just negativity and grumbling. But going back to Moses, instead of speaking to the rock as God had commanded, he strikes the rock twice out of just pure frustration.
So even Moses, the guy who parted the Red Sea, he gets caught up in this frustration. It makes you think how easy it is for any of us to fall into that trap of negativity.
Oh, it does. And for Moses, this one act of disobedience had huge consequences. He was barred from entering into the Promised Land just like the generation before him.
Wow. Talk about a reminder that even the greatest leaders are held accountable for their actions. It really highlights the importance of obedience, even when we don't understand or agree.
It does. It shows that our actions, they have ripple effects.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if we're talking about consequences, we have to mention the story of the spies.
Yes.
It always sends chills down my spine.
It's a powerful one. So 12 spies are sent into Canaan to kind of check out the land. 10 come back absolutely terrified. They're painting this picture of impossible obstacles and these giants that they can't possibly defeat. Only Joshua and Caleb urge the people to trust in God's power.
So they let their fear create a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Because guess what? They end up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years because of their lack of faith.
Exactly. It's a really sobering example of how what we believe can literally shape our reality. The spies report basically condemns an entire generation to die in the wilderness.
So, Okay, we've got rebellion, divine judgment, a whole lot of wandering. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? What about that story of the bronze serpent? That one always intrigued me.
Ah, yes, that one is full of symbolism. So after more grumbling from the Israelites, God sends fiery serpents among them.
Ouch. Sounds like a pretty painful consequence.
It was, but when the people repent, Moses, he intercedes for them. God tells him to make this bronze serpent and lift it up on a pole. Anyone who's been bitten, if they just look at the serpent, they'll be healed.
So it's not just about physical healing, though, right? Like if there's a deeper meaning there.
Absolutely. This foreshadows Jesus' crucifixion and the power of faith. Just like looking at the bronze serpent brought healing. We're healed from the venom of sin when we look to Jesus in faith.
Wow. The beautiful imagery. So we've got rebellion, we've got judgment, we've got healing. We even have a glimpse of the gospel message, all wrapped up in these incredible stories. It sounds like Numbers is way more than just a bunch of numbers.
It is. It grapples with life's biggest questions. Faith, obedience, leadership, and even the nature of God himself.
And speaking of God, it seems like the Israelites really put him through his paces.
They really did.
Wouldn't you say?
Their journey is a testament to the consequences of disobedience, but also to the depths of God's mercy and faithfulness.
Yeah, okay. So we've touched on some of those dramatic highlights. But what about those censuses we mentioned earlier?
Right.
What can we actually learn from those seemingly dry accounts?
Well, believe it or not, those detailed lists of names and numbers, they actually tell us a lot about the Israelite society and God's plan for them.
Okay. I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Tell me more about how these numbers come to life.
So the first census, you can find in Numbers 1, it focuses on the men of Israel who are eligible for military service. Each tribe is meticulously accounted for, which highlights their organizational structure and their potential for military strength.
So it's not just about counting heads. It's about assessing their readiness for battle.
Exactly. After all, they are on this mission to conquer the Promised Land.
Right.
And this meticulous record-keeping reminds us that their journey is purposeful. It requires organization, discipline, and that willingness to fight for what God has promised.
Okay, so what about the second census? Does it paint a similar picture?
The second census, taken in Numbers 26, serves a slightly different purpose. This one counts the new generation, the ones who actually enter into the Promised Land after 40 years of wilderness wanderings. And it reveals a shift in demographics, with some tribes flourishing while others have dwindled.
So it's like a snapshot of how the wilderness experience shaped them, revealing the consequences of their choices over time.
Precisely. Those who rebelled against God, they perished in the wilderness, but those who stayed faithful were blessed with offspring. It really emphasizes that obedience leads to blessing.
Right.
And disobedience, well, not so much.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that God's plans, they aren't easily thwarted by human rebellion. Like, even though an entire generation perished because of their lack of faith, God remained committed to fulfilling his promise to Abraham's descendants.
It's a testament to his faithfulness and the enduring nature of his covenant. Even in the midst of judgment, there's hope for a new beginning. The second census, it points towards a brighter future for that new generation, who hopefully will learn from their parents' mistakes and walk in obedience to God.
It makes you think about those cycles we see in our own lives and how important it is to break free from those negative patterns.
It does, and it speaks to the power of repentance and renewal.
So we've got these censuses, these epic stories, and then there's all this detail about rituals and laws and even the layout of the Israelite camp.
Right.
It can feel a bit overwhelming, honestly. Like, is there a reason for all of this specificity?
That's a question that has intrigued scholars for centuries. Some just see these details as purely historical. It just offers a glimpse into daily life, the religious practices of the Israelites. But then others believe that there's a deeper symbolic meaning woven into these seemingly mundane elements.
Okay, so what kind of symbolic meanings are we talking about here?
For example, the layout of the camp. The tabernacle is in the center,
Right.
surrounded by the priests and the Levites.
Right.
And then the 12 tribes radiating outward.
Yeah.
You could see that as this microcosm of God's ideal order for the world.
So the physical arrangement represents like a deeper spiritual truth. Like it's this visual reminder of God's presence at the heart of their lives, with everything else flowing out from that central point.
Exactly. And those descriptions of the tabernacle and its furnishings with the craftsmanship and the symbolism,
Right.
they could be interpreted as pointing toward those heavenly realities, almost like a shadow or foreshadowing of the heavenly temple.
It's fascinating to think that even like the most mundane details of their lives were infused with this spiritual significance.
Yeah, it is.
It makes me wonder what details in our own lives might hold deeper meaning if we just stop to consider them.
It's an invitation to look beyond just the surface, consider the layers of meaning that might be hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, you're right. It challenges us to pay attention and look for those hidden meanings, those glimpses of the divine in just everyday life.
Yeah.
So speaking of deeper meaning, we've talked a lot about the Israelites and their journey.
Right.
But what about the overall message of the book itself? What do you think the author or authors wanted to convey to us,
Right.
Future generations?
Well, the book of Numbers, it serves as this powerful cautionary tale, highlighting the dangers of unbelief and disobedience, and like we said, grumbling. That's a big one. It's this stark reminder that those same patterns can have negative consequences in our own lives if we aren't careful.
Yeah, I mean, the Israelites' constant complaining and lack of trust in God had some pretty disastrous results.
It did. And the book reminds us that we need to be vigilant, self-aware, and constantly examining our hearts and our motives.
Yeah, but it's not all doom and gloom, right? There's this glimmer of hope that's woven through these stories.
Absolutely. Despite all their failings, God never abandoned the Israelites. He remained faithful to his promises,
Yes.
even when they weren't.
Yeah, he constantly provided for them, guided them, protected them. It's a reminder that no matter what we've done, no matter how far we've strayed, God's love doesn't change.
It doesn't. His promises are sure, and he will never break them.
That is incredibly comforting. So the book of Numbers paints this picture of God as powerful, holy, just, but also loving, merciful, and faithful.
Oh.
And it's important to hold all of those aspects together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You can't just focus on one side of God's character. You got to see the whole picture to really understand who he truly is.
It's that combination of attributes that makes him who he is.
Right.
And it's that combination that makes, our salvation and transformation possible.
Well said. I think for all of its challenges and complexities, Numbers is ultimately a testament to God's amazing grace.
It really is. And it reminds us that we can always trust in his love, his mercy, and his faithfulness no matter what we might be going through.
No matter what. It's funny. You mentioned all this talk about complaining and negativity.
Yeah.
And, their lack of trust and faith.
Right.
And I think a lot of people think that the wilderness was meant to be just like this punishment. Like they were bad, so they got sent to the wilderness. But I really think it was more about preparation.
Okay, I like that. Preparation for what exactly?
Well, to enter into the promised land.
Right.
Which was a completely different life.
Of course, yeah.
They were going from being slaves in Egypt to
Okay.
being, in essence, their own nation. They
Yeah.
had to learn how to govern themselves, follow God's law.
It's like a crash course in nation building.
Exactly. And, the wilderness, it provided that space and time for that preparation.
But it's interesting because even with all that preparation, they still struggled, right?
Yeah.
Like there's this constant tension between their human nature and God's desire for them to be this holy people.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's what makes the book of Numbers so relatable. It's a reflection of our own struggles, isn't it? We have these high ideals. We want to follow God,
Right.
but we keep messing up.
We sure do.
We grumble, we complain, we disobey, we forget.
It's a constant battle.
It is. But the book also reminds us that God is patient with us.
Yes.
He's constantly giving us second chances.
He is, yes.
He's using these experiences to shape us and mold us into the people that he wants us to be.
So how do we apply this to our lives today? I mean, we're not wandering through the wilderness literally,
Right.
but we all face challenges and temptations.
We do. And I think the key is to recognize that those challenges, they're not meant to break us.
Right.
They're meant to refine us.
I like that.
It's about surrendering to God's process and trusting that he's working all things together for our good.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But the more we surrender to his process, the more we grow in faith and obedience, and we become more like the people that he created us to be.
It's like that saying, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain.
I love that. That's a great analogy.
Right.
Yeah.
So how can we, practically speaking, learn to dance in the rain?
Yeah.
Like, what are some concrete things that we can do when we're facing those wilderness moments?
Well, I think the first step is to recognize those negative thought patterns, the grumbling, the complaining, and try to replace those thoughts with gratitude.
Okay.
It's amazing how much just shifting our perspective can change our outlook.
Yeah, focusing on what we have to be thankful for instead of what's going wrong.
Exactly. The other thing is, remember that you're not alone. God is with you in the wilderness.
Yeah.
He's never going to leave you or forsake you.
That's such a good reminder.
Reach out to him in prayer, ask for his guidance, ask for his strength,
Yeah.
and don't be afraid to lean on your community.
Yes.
Surround yourself with people who will encourage you, pray for you, and remind you of God's faithfulness.
I love that. So it's a combination of both our own effort and relying on God's grace.
Absolutely. And as we do those things, we'll find that those wilderness experiences, as hard as they may be, they actually become opportunities for incredible growth and transformation.
And isn't that what the journey of faith is all about?
It is.
Becoming more like Christ. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on something that I find really fascinating about the book.
Okay.
It's all about the concept of boundaries.
Oh, interesting.
There are so many boundaries in place, both physical and spiritual. You've got the layout of the camp, the laws regarding purity and holiness, the priesthood being set apart, even Moses not being allowed to enter the promised land.
Right.
What do you make of all these boundaries? Like, what's the significance?
That's a great question. And I think it goes back to the idea of God's holiness and his desire for order.
Right.
Boundaries, they create a distinction between the sacred and the profane.
Okay.
They protect what's holy, and they help us to approach God with reverence and awe.
It's like those boundaries are in place for our own good.
They are. Think about it. If there were no boundaries, there would be no sense of order or structure.
Chaos.
Exactly. It'd be chaos. And we would lose sight of God's holiness and the importance of respecting his presence.
So those boundaries aren't meant to be restrictive. They're actually meant to provide a framework for a deeper relationship with God.
Precisely. They guide us towards a life of holiness and obedience.
It's like those boundaries are actually a sign of God's love for us.
I think so. They show that he cares about our well-being, and he wants to protect us from the consequences of sin.
Yeah, it's like a loving parent setting limits for their child's safety and growth.
Exactly. And as we respect those boundaries, we find that we actually experience more freedom and joy in our relationship with him.
That's a really powerful point. So those boundaries aren't about limiting us. They're about guiding us towards true freedom.
I love that. Yes, I totally agree.
So, as we continue to explore the book of Numbers, I think it's important to keep this concept of boundaries in mind because they really play a crucial role in shaping the Israelites' journey and ultimately in preparing them for the promised land.
Yeah, that's a great insight.
It's fascinating how those boundaries we were just talking about in Numbers, they kind of show up in our lives today.
Oh, they do in so many ways.
Like, think about our relationships,
Right.
our work, how we use our time and resources.
Absolutely. Like, setting healthy boundaries can make such a big difference.
Exactly. Like, it helps us live more balanced, purposeful lives, right?
It really does. It can protect us from burnout, help us make better decisions, avoid those negative consequences.
It's all about those healthy rhythms and structures.
Right. Those are key.
That support our well-being, both spiritual and emotional.
I think so too.
So the wisdom in the book of Numbers is not just for ancient times, it's for us here and now.
It's timeless, isn't it?
It really is. And the more we understand those principles,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to live lives that are pleasing to God.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive on Numbers.
It is. It's been an incredible journey.
It has.
Exploring the wilderness, encountering those rebellious Israelites, learning about those divine interventions.
Yeah, there were some intense moments, for sure.
There were. But through it all, we see this amazing tapestry of God's character.
We do. His faithfulness, his mercy, his justice.
Yeah, and his unwavering commitment to his people.
And his love for us, even when we mess up.
Exactly. So if you're feeling a little lost in your own wilderness right now, remember what we've learned from the Israelites.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Keep trusting God.
He'll never leave you.
He won't. He'll guide you to that promised land, even if the journey takes longer than you expected.
Sometimes those detours lead us to exactly where we need to be.
They do. They really do. Well, that's it for today's deep dive.
It was great chatting with you.
It was great being here with you. Thanks for joining us on By the Pages. We'll see you next time for another adventure.
Looking forward to it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.